For years, you've lived through the eyes of others, your decisions shaped by their expectations, your identity molded by their judgment. Piece by piece, you traded your own voice for their approval, until you could barely recognize yourself. The Stoics knew that real power returns the moment you stop seeking validation and start living from the inside out. What follows is their blueprint, a guide back to your own judgment, your own strength, your own freedom. Subscribe for more Stoic audiobooks and begin rebuilding your life from the foundation that matters, yourself. Chapter 1. The Cage You Built from Borrowed Thoughts. You weren't born caring what others think. Watch a child fall. They get up. No shame, no audience awareness, no internal narrative about what the other kids might say. They simply rise and continue. That instinct, that pure, unfiltered response to life that was yours once. Then the world taught you to perform. It started small. A parent's approval when you behaved correctly. A teacher's praise when you colored inside the lines. A friend's laughter when you said the right thing. Each moment of external validation deposited itself into your nervous system like currency. You learned the exchange rate. Certain behaviors equal approval. Approval equals safety. Safety equals survival. By the time you reached adulthood, you'd built an entire identity around this transaction. The Stoics had a term for this. Ta f hemen, things not in our control. Epictetus, who spent his early years as a slave before becoming one of history's most influential philosophers, understood this distinction with brutal clarity. He divided the world into two categories, what you control and what you don't. The opinions of others, not in your control, never were, never will be. Yet you've spent how many years trying to control them anyway? Curating your image, filtering your words, smoothing your edges, performing a version of yourself you thought would be acceptable, lovable, worthy. You became a man at war with reality itself, exhausting yourself in a battle that cannot be won. Here's what that war costs you. Every morning, you wake up and the first thought isn't, what do I need today? It's, what do they expect from me? You dress for their eyes. You speak in their language. You move through your life like an actor who's forgotten he's performing, convinced the role is real. You take a job you hate because it sounds impressive. You stay in relationships that drain you because leaving might look like failure. You post carefully curated moments online, then check obsessively to see if the performance landed. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You nod along with opinions you don't hold. And somewhere beneath all that performance, the real you suffocates. The blacksmith doesn't explain his work to every passerby. He doesn't pause between hammer strikes to ensure the crowd approves of his technique. He knows his craft. He knows the metal. He knows what the blade requires. The opinions of spectators, whether praise or criticism, change nothing about the fundamental truth of the work. You are the blacksmith. Your life is the blade. The crowd is irrelevant. But you've been conditioned to believe the opposite. You've been taught that other people's thoughts about you are somehow more real, more valid, more important than your own direct experience of yourself. This is the greatest lie ever sold to men seeking to build themselves. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome with absolute power over millions, wrote in his private journals about this very struggle. A man who commanded armies, shaped laws, and determined fates, still wrestling with the fundamental human tendency to care too much about opinions. He wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Read that again. An emperor, recognizing the absurdity of prioritizing strangers' thoughts over his own judgment. If a man with that much external validation still had to remind himself of this truth, what does that tell you about the depth of this conditioning? It tells you that freedom from others' opinions isn't something you achieve once and keep forever. It's a practice, a daily decision, a muscle you build through repeated use. Let's examine the mechanics of how this cage operates. When you care about someone's opinion of you, you're essentially giving them authority over your emotional state. You've made them the arbiter of your worth. Think about that. You've taken your sense of self, the most intimate, personal thing you possess, and outsourced its validation to someone who doesn't live in your skin, doesn't know your struggles, doesn't see your private victories. They see a fraction of you, a performance, a curated highlight reel, and you've given that incomplete perception the power to determine whether you feel good or bad about yourself. This is insanity, dressed up as social awareness. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Does it matter how many masters you have? Slavery is one, and the man who cannot shake it off is a slave, no matter how many masters he has." Every person whose opinion you care about becomes a master. Every time you adjust your behavior to meet their expectations, you reinforce the chains. You think you're being considerate, diplomatic, socially intelligent, but what you're actually doing is trading your sovereignty for temporary approval that may not even come. And here's the cruel joke. They're probably not thinking about you at all. The person whose judgment you fear, they're wrapped up in their own performance, worried about their own audience, seeking their own validation. They're too busy managing their own identity to spend significant time analyzing yours. You're suffering under the weight of opinions that mostly don't exist outside your imagination. You've created a prison guard in your mind, given him the voice and face of people you know, and allowed him to control your every move. And he's not even real. He's a projection, a fear, a ghost. The Stoics would tell you, the only opinion that matters is the one held by the man who knows you best, yourself. And even that opinion needs constant examination, because you're capable of lying to yourself more effectively than anyone else could. So what does freedom look like? It's not callousness. It's not arrogance. It's not the desperate performative rebellion of a man screaming, "I don't care what anyone thinks," while clearly caring desperately. Real freedom is quieter than that. It's the ability to hear criticism without your identity fracturing, to receive praise without becoming dependent on it, to make decisions based on your own values and judgment, knowing that some people will approve and others won't, and that both reactions are equally irrelevant to the truth of your choice. It's standing in the storm of others' opinions and feeling them move through you without taking root. But getting there requires you to face something uncomfortable, the reasons you started caring in the first place. For most men, the need for approval is rooted in survival anxiety. At some point, you learned that acceptance equals safety. Maybe you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, granted only when you performed correctly. Maybe you were rejected or ridiculed at a crucial developmental moment, and your nervous system logged that experience as a threat to avoid at all costs. Whatever the origin, your brain developed a pattern. External validation reduces threat. Therefore, seek external validation constantly. This made sense when you were 7. It's destroying you at 27 or 37. The child needed approval to survive. The man doesn't. But the child's fear is still running your adult decisions, like outdated software that hasn't been updated. Here's what updating that software looks like in practice. You notice the urge to perform. You feel it rising, the impulse to say something clever, to adjust your posture, to check your phone to see who's validating you. And instead of automatically following that impulse, you pause. You ask, what am I actually afraid of right now? Not in a therapeutic, endless processing way, in a direct, honest way. What is the feared consequence if this person doesn't approve of you? What terrible thing do you imagine will happen? Most of the time, when you examine the fear directly, it evaporates. Because the feared consequence is abstract, vague, ultimately toothless. They might think less of you, they might not like you, they might judge you, and then what? You continue existing. The sun rises. Your bills still need paying. Your responsibilities remain. Your actual life, the one you live in your body, in your moments, in your direct experience, continues completely unchanged by their opinion. The only thing that changes is a thought in someone else's head. A thought you can't see, can't verify, can't control, and that has zero material impact on your existence unless you grant it power. Epictetus taught his students, if you wish to be free, desire nothing and no one that depends on others. If you do, you must necessarily be a slave. Freedom isn't the absence of judgment from others, it's the presence of clarity about what actually matters. And what matters is this: are you living according to your own examined values? Are you building something real? Are you showing up with integrity to the people and purposes you've chosen? If yes, then criticism is just noise. If no, then praise is a distraction from the work you need to do. Either way, the opinions themselves are irrelevant. They're weather. They pass through. The mountain remains. You are the mountain. But becoming the mountain requires you to stop being the flag that flaps in every wind of opinion. It requires you to find your own ground, your own bedrock of self-knowledge and principle. It requires you to build a relationship with yourself that's stronger than any external voice. This is where most men fail, because building that internal foundation is hard, lonely work. It's easier to keep performing, easier to keep seeking validation, easier to stay in the cage because at least it's familiar. The Stoics knew this too. They knew that freedom is a practice, not a destination, that you don't simply decide one day to stop caring and have it immediately take effect. You practice. You fail. You notice when you're performing. You course correct. You fail again. You keep practicing. And gradually, over weeks and months and years, the weight of others' opinions grows lighter, not because you've become callous, but because you've become rooted in something deeper. You've found your own ground. That's what the next chapter is about. How to find that ground when everything you've built so far has been on borrowed land. Cut the performance. Cut the seeking. Cut the endless adjustment of yourself to fit their expectations. What remains is the work, and the work is always the same. Know yourself. Be yourself. Improve yourself. Everything else is distraction. The cage you built from borrowed thoughts? You hold the key. You've always held it. Time to use it. Chapter 2. The Violence of Living for Applause. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from performing your life instead of living it. You know the feeling. It's that bone-deep tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. The fatigue that settles into your chest and makes every interaction feel like work. You're tired because you're running two operations simultaneously, living your actual life and managing everyone else's perception of it. This is violence. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind you inflict on yourself daily, hour by hour, in the name of being accepted. The Stoics understood that every yes you give, that should be a no, is a small betrayal of self. Every time you modify your truth to be more palatable, you're performing surgery on your soul without anesthesia. You might not feel it immediately, but the wound compounds. Seneca wrote about men who spent their entire lives preparing to live, never actually starting. They accumulated wealth for a future that might never come. They postponed their real desires until conditions were perfect. They waited for permission that would never be granted. You're doing the same thing, but your currency is approval instead of gold. You're waiting for enough validation before you finally feel safe to be yourself. You're collecting opinions like armor, hoping that eventually you'll have enough positive ones to shield you from criticism. But armor is heavy, and you're discovering that no amount of approval from others creates the internal safety you're seeking. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in your daily life. You're in a meeting. Someone says something you disagree with. You know they're wrong, not subjectively, but objectively wrong about a fact or approach. But you don't speak up. Why? Because you're calculating, running a complex algorithm in your head. What will they think if I contradict them? Will I seem difficult? Arrogant? Will it create tension? Will it affect how they perceive me? So you stay silent. The wrong decision gets made. The project suffers. And you justified it as being professional or picking your battles. But really, you just chose their comfort over your integrity. That's the first violence, self-silencing. Or you're at a social gathering. Someone makes a joke that isn't funny or says something that contradicts your values. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, even though nothing inside you finds it amusing or acceptable. You've just participated in something you don't believe in for the reward of fitting in. That's the second violence, false agreement. Or you're building something, a business, a skill, a creative project. You know what it needs to be. You have a vision. But before you execute it, you start wondering what people will think. You dilute the vision. You sand down its edges. You make it safer, more palatable, more likely to receive generic approval. And in that process, you kill what made it real. That's the third violence, self-editing before you've even spoken. These violences accumulate. They stack up like debt. And like debt, they charge interest in the form of resentment, confusion about who you actually are, and a creeping sense that you're living someone else's life. Marcus Aurelius, amid the chaos of ruling an empire and fighting wars, wrote this reminder to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But here's what makes this particularly cruel. The applause you're seeking? It's inconsistent, unreliable, and fundamentally hollow, even when you get it. Think about the last time someone praised you. How long did that feeling last? A few hours? A day? Maybe a week, if it was significant praise? And then what? You needed more. The hit wore off. You were back to seeking teteod. The next validation, the next approval, the next reassurance that you're okay. You've become addicted to a drug that doesn't work. Worse, the people dispensing this drug, these opinions you crave, they're not even qualified to judge you. They don't know your full story. They haven't walked your path. They haven't faced your specific challenges or inherited your specific burdens. They're looking at a sliver of your life through the lens of their own biases, fears, and limitations. And you've given them authority over your self-worth. A man asks his father if he's proud of him. The father says yes. The man feels good. The father says no. The man feels destroyed. But in both cases, nothing about the man's actual life, accomplishments, character, or trajectory has changed. Only a thought in someone else's head, a thought shaped by that person's own issues, expectations, and emotional state, has shifted. You've given reality-altering power to something completely outside your control. Epictetus, who understood slavery literally and philosophically, made this distinction. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Living for applause is voluntary slavery. You've made yourself a slave to every opinion, every judgment, every reaction. You check your phone 50 times a day to see if the masters are pleased with your performance. You adjust your behavior based on their moods. You feel good or bad, depending on their feedback. And the cruelest part? Most of them aren't even thinking about you. They're slaves to their own need for approval, caught in the same cycle, too preoccupied with their own performance to spend meaningful time analyzing yours. You're suffering under imagined judgment from people who are too busy seeking their own validation to judge you as thoroughly as you fear. Let's examine the practical mechanics of breaking this pattern. First, you need to audit your life for performance. Go through your typical day and identify moments where you're acting for an audience rather than from authentic choice. This isn't about judgment. It's about awareness. When do you modify your words? When do you suppress your truth? When do you do things solely because of how they'll look to others? When do you not do things because you fear judgment? Write this down. Be specific. Not I care what people think, but I don't speak up in meetings because I'm afraid of seeming stupid. Or I post on social media, then compulsively check for likes because I need confirmation that I'm interesting. The specificity matters because vague awareness changes nothing. Precise awareness creates leverage for change. Second, you need to identify whose opinions you're actually seeking. Most men discover they're performing for a surprisingly small audience, maybe 3 to 5 people whose approval they desperately crave. Often these are parents, seeking the validation they never got as children. Peers they admire or envy, seeking proof they measure up. Romantic partners, seeking confirmation of worthiness. An imagined audience of strangers, seeking general social proof. Name them. Understand why their opinion carries weight. Usually, you'll discover that the weight is inherited from childhood or from a moment of vulnerability where their rejection hurt you deeply. Then ask the crucial question: are these people living the life I want to live? Do they embody the values I'm trying to build? Do they have the wisdom and experience to guide me toward my actual goals? Most of the time, the answer is no. You're seeking approval from people who aren't qualified to grant it, whose lives don't reflect what you're trying to build, whose values may directly contradict your own. You're asking a man who's never built anything to approve of your building. You're asking a woman who values comfort to approve of your risk-taking. You're asking people who play it safe to validate your courage. The math doesn't work. Third, you need to replace the external validation with internal verification. This is the hardest part because you've been conditioned to trust others' opinions more than your own judgment. Internal verification means, did I act according to my examined values? Did I show up with integrity? Did I do the hard thing when it was required? Did I speak my truth even when it was uncomfortable? If yes, you're on track. If no, you have work to do. Either way, the judgment comes from within, from a standard you've set after careful thought, not from the fluctuating opinions of others. The blacksmith knows if the blade is well made. He doesn't need spectators to tell him. He has standards, experience, a relationship with the craft. He can feel the difference between adequate work and excellent work in his hands. You need to develop that same relationship with your own life. You need to know, not think, not hope, but know when you're living with integrity and when you're not. That knowledge comes from practice, from repeated self-examination, from building a coherent value system and actually living by it. This is what the Stoics meant by wisdom. Not book knowledge, but practical understanding of what matters and the discipline to act accordingly, regardless of audience. Seneca warned about the trap of delayed living. You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. When you live for applause, you're operating under a delusion of infinite time. You'll be authentic later, after you've accumulated enough approval. You'll be yourself eventually, once conditions are perfect. You'll stop performing when you finally feel safe. But that safety never comes from external sources, and time is shorter than you think. The violence of living for applause isn't just what it does to you internally, it's what it costs you externally. Real relationships buzz, built on authentic connection. Real work, born from genuine vision. Real growth, forged through honest self-confrontation. All of it sacrificed on the altar of looking good to people who probably aren't even paying attention. Cut the performance before it cuts you. Cut the seeking before it hollows you out. Cut the addiction to approval before it wastes the only life you have. What remains when you stop performing? Fear, initially. The raw terror of being yourself without the buffer of others' validation. The vulnerability of standing in your truth without knowing if anyone will approve. But beneath that fear, something solid, something real, something that doesn't shift with every wind of opinion. Yourself, finally. The Stoics called this autarkeia, self-sufficiency. Not isolation or arrogance, but the internal stability that comes from knowing who you are and living accordingly, independent of external feedback. This is what you're building toward, not callousness, but clarity, not indifference, but discernment, not the absence of care, but the presence of wisdom about what deserves your care. Other people's opinions don't make the list. They never did. You just forgot that truth somewhere along the way, buried under years of conditioning and fear. Time to remember. Time to stop performing your life and start living it. The applause was never meant to be the goal. It was always just noise. And you've been dancing to a rhythm that has nothing to do with your actual music. Find your own rhythm. Move to that. Let the audience fade into the background where it belongs. The only performance that matters is the one you give to yourself each day. Did I show up? Did I speak truth? Did I act with integrity? Did I build something real? Answer those questions honestly, and you won't need applause. You'll have something far more valuable, self-respect. And that, unlike applause, compounds with time. Chapter 4. The Silent Strength of Men Who Walked Away. There's a specific kind of power in walking away. Not the dramatic exit. Not the door slam or the burned bridge or the social media announcement. The quiet walk. The one where you simply recognize that something or someone is incompatible with your sovereignty, and you remove yourself without explanation or performance. Most men never develop this power because they believe they owe everyone an explanation. They believe walking away without detailed justification is cruel, immature, or cowardly, so they stay in situations that drain them. They maintain relationships that contradict their values. They remain accessible to people who disrespect their boundaries. And they call this staying maturity. The Stoics would call it voluntary imprisonment. Seneca wrote about the importance of choosing your company carefully. Avoid, as you would the plague, a companion who is a flatterer and a gossiper. For the person who flits from one vice to another, like a bird among roosts, is extremely harmful and should be steered clear of. Notice he didn't say, have a heart-to-heart conversation with the flatterer and gossiper to help them see their flaws. He said, avoid. Create distance. Remove yourself. There's wisdom in knowing when discourse is pointless, and departure is the only rational response. Let's examine the situations where walking away is the strongest move you can make. You're in a friendship where you're the only one putting in effort. You initiate contact. You show up. You remember important details about their life. And they show up when convenient. Forget what matters to you. Treat your time like it's infinite and disposable. You could have the talk. You could explain how their behavior makes you feel. You could give them another chance to do better, and maybe they would, for a few weeks, before sliding back in to the same patterns. Or you could simply stop initiating, stop being available, let the relationship die its natural death through mutual disinterest, because clearly that's what it is. You're just the only one who hasn't accepted it yet. Walking away doesn't require their understanding or agreement. It doesn't require closure. It just requires you to stop investing energy where it isn't reciprocated or valued. This feels wrong to most men because they've been taught that loyalty means staying regardless of how they're treated, that real friendship weathers anything, that walking away is quitting. But loyalty to someone who disrespects you is disloyalty to yourself. Epictetus taught his students to make a distinction between what's in their control and what isn't. You can't control whether someone values your presence. You can't control whether they reciprocate effort. You can't make them be the friend you need. But you can control where you invest your limited time and energy. And investing it in people who don't value it isn't noble, it's self-destructive. The same principle applies to romantic relationships. You're with someone who requires you to be smaller, quieter, less yourself to keep the peace. They criticize your ambitions. They mock your interests. They make you feel like your growth is a threat to their comfort. You could try to make them understand. You could explain why their behavior hurts. You could hope they'll change. Or you could recognize that a relationship requiring you to shrink isn't a relationship. It's a slow form of suffocation. Walking away from relationships that diminish you isn't cruelty. It's self-preservation. It's recognizing that not every connection deserves to be maintained just because it exists. Marcus Aurelius, despite being surrounded by people his entire life, wrote about the importance of selective association. If you do not wish to be prone to anger, do not feed the habit. Give it nothing which may tend to its increase. He understood that certain people, certain environments, certain dynamics feed destructive patterns. And the solution isn't to white-knuckle your way through them, it's to remove yourself. But walking away isn't just about relationships. It's about situations, environments, and identities that no longer serve you. You're in a career that looks good on paper, but eats your soul. Everyone tells you how lucky you are, how foolish you'd be to leave, how much you're making, how impressive the title is. And yet, every morning, you wake up dreading the day. Every Sunday night, you feel the weight descending. Every meeting, every task, every interaction feels like wearing someone else's skin. You could stay. You could tell yourself it's responsible, adult, smart. You could accumulate more money, more status, more reasons to feel trapped. Or you could walk away. Not recklessly, not without a plan, but deliberately. Recognizing that a gilded cage is still a cage, and staying in it because others approve isn't wisdom, it's cowardice dressed as prudence. Seneca spent years advising Emperor Nero, accumulating enormous wealth and influence. Then he recognized the moral corruption of the position and asked permission to retire. Nero refused. Eventually Seneca withdrew anyway, living his final years in philosophical contemplation rather than political compromise. He walked away from power because staying would have cost him his integrity. That's the calculation. What does staying cost you versus what does leaving cost you? Most men never do this calculation honestly. They focus on the external costs of leaving, money, status, others' opinions, while ignoring the internal costs of staying, self-respect, authenticity, vitality, time. They stay in jobs that kill their spirit but pay well. They stay in cities they hate because that's where their career is. They stay in social circles that bore them because that's what people in their position do, and they wonder why they feel dead inside. The Stoics were clear. Life is short. Seneca's entire treatise on the shortness of life is dedicated to this reality. You have limited time. Every day you spend in a situation that contradicts your values is a day you can't get back. Walking away isn't giving up. It's refusing to waste your finite existence on what doesn't matter. But here's what makes this so difficult. Walking away usually means walking toward uncertainty. And humans hate uncertainty more than they hate misery. At least misery is predictable. You leave the job without another one lined up. You end the relationship without knowing if you'll find another. You move cities without a network waiting. You walk away from the identity people know you by without knowing who you'll become next. This uncertainty feels like death to your nervous system. So you stay. You rationalize. You convince yourself that the known misery is better than unknown possibility. Epictetus, who went from slave to free man to philosopher, understood this deeply. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The uncertainty of walking away isn't the problem. Your terror of that uncertainty is. And that terror is just a feeling. It's not truth. It's not prophecy. It's nervous system conditioning that you can override through action. That truth doesn't change just because you feel doubt. The situation that was draining you before is still draining. The person who disrespected your boundaries before will still disrespect them. The environment that required you to be small still requires it. Nothing has changed except your momentary emotional state, and making life decisions based on momentary emotional states is how you end up trapped. So you stay the course. You trust the decision you made from a clear-headed place. You let the doubt exist without letting it control you. And then something interesting happens. You adapt. The uncertainty becomes familiar. The space where the old situation existed fills with new things, better things, things that actually align with who you're becoming. New people enter your life who respect your boundaries. New opportunities appear that fit your values. New versions of yourself emerge that couldn't exist in the old constraints. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." What feels like loss in the moment, the relationship ended, the job left, the identity released, is actually transformation. You're not losing something you need. You're shedding something that was keeping you small. But you won't know this until you actually walk away. You can't think your way to certainty before acting. The certainty comes from action, from staying committed to the decision, from discovering that you survive and then thrive in the uncertainty. This is why walking away is a practice, not a one-time event. You do it once with a small thing, a friendship that's run its course, a commitment that no longer fits. You survive. You learn that walking away doesn't destroy you. Then you do it with something bigger and bigger. Each time you build evidence that you can trust yourself to handle the consequences. Each time you strengthen the muscle of prioritizing your sovereignty over comfort. Eventually, walking away becomes your default response to anything that contradicts your values. Not from coldness or lack of commitment, but from clarity about what you will and won't tolerate in your life. You become a man who stays because he chooses to, not because he's afraid to leave. There's profound power in that distinction. People can feel it. They treat you differently when they sense you're there by choice, not obligation. Relationships improve because there's no resentment from forced participation. Work improves because you're genuinely engaged, not grimly enduring. And when something stops working, you address it honestly, and if it can't be resolved, you leave. No drama, no extended explanations, no performance of suffering to justify your choice. You simply recognize that continuation would violate your sovereignty, and you walk. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but freedom from being controlled by emotions that don't serve you. You still feel, you still care, but you're not enslaved by the fear of loss, the guilt of disappointing others, or the anxiety of uncertainty. You're free, not because nothing matters, but because you've clarified what matters and you've committed to protecting it. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." The fear of walking away is almost always worse than the reality of having walked away. Your mind creates catastrophic scenarios that rarely materialize, and even when difficulties arise, you discover you're more capable of handling them than you imagined. So what's keeping you? What situation, relationship, or identity are you maintaining despite knowing it contradicts your sovereignty? You know what it is. You've known for a while. You've just been waiting for permission, for certainty, for the perfect moment. But permission comes from you. Certainty comes after action, and the perfect moment is always now. The silent strength of men who walked away isn't that they never doubted. It's that they walked anyway. They felt the fear and recognized it as weather. They heard the guilt and understood it as conditioning. They sensed the uncertainty and knew it as the price of growth. And they walked. Not away from responsibility, not away from commitment, but away from situations that required them to be less than they are, to accept treatment they don't respect, to maintain connections that drain rather than nourish. They walk toward alignment, toward sovereignty, toward lives that actually belong to them. This is the work. Not announcing your standards loudly, but enforcing them quietly. Not explaining why you're leaving, but simply leaving. Not seeking approval for your choices, but making them and living with the consequences. Cut the dead weight. Cut the toxic connection. Cut the misaligned situation. What remains is space. Empty space that feels terrifying at first, then liberating, then necessary. Space to build what you actually want. Space to become who you actually are. Space to attract what actually aligns. The forge needs room to work. The blacksmith needs space to move. The blade needs air to cool into its final form. Give yourself that space. Walk away from what fills it with noise and obligation and performance. The path forward often requires first walking away from the path you're on. Most men never walk. They stand in place complaining about the view, wondering why they feel stuck. You're not most men, or at least you don't have to be. The exit is there. It's always been there. You just needed permission to see it. Consider this permission granted, not from me, from yourself. Now walk. Chapter 5. The Endgame. Building a life that needs no defense. You've done the work. You've identified the cage of others' opinions. You've recognized the violence of living for applause. You've practiced self-sovereignty. You've walked away from what contradicts your values. Now what? This is where most men stumble. They clear the deadwood, create space, set boundaries, then don't know what to build in the emptiness. They've defined what they're against, but not what they're for. They've removed the noise, but haven't found the signal. Freedom from others' opinions isn't the destination. It's the foundation. What you build on that foundation determines whether you've actually transformed or just replaced one form of seeking with another. The Stoics understood this. They didn't pursue freedom for its own sake. They pursued it so they could live according to virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Freedom was the prerequisite, not the goal. So the question becomes, what are you free for? Most men, when they first taste freedom from others' opinions, make a predictable mistake. They swing to the opposite extreme. If they've been people-pleasers, they become defiant. If they've been accommodating, they become rigid. If they've been seeking approval, they start actively courting disapproval. This isn't freedom. This is still being controlled by others' opinions, just in reverse. You're still in reaction to them, still defining yourself in opposition to them, still giving them power over your choices. True freedom is indifference, not in the sense of not caring about anything, but in the sense of not needing to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." But there's a second level to this. We often care more about our opinions, ion of ourselves, our identity, our self-image, than about simply living well. We become attached to being the man who doesn't care what others think, and that attachment is just another cage. The endgame is dropping even that identity, dropping all identities, simply acting according to your values in each moment, without needing to label or announce or defend what you're doing. This is what the Stoics meant by living according to nature, not wilderness survival or rejection of civilization, but alignment with reality as it is, acting according to reason and virtue, accepting what comes without resistance or attachment. Let's make this concrete. You've built a business. It succeeds beyond your expectations. People start calling you an entrepreneur, a success story, an inspiration, and you feel the pull to maintain that identity, to keep performing success, to make decisions based on preserving the image. That's the trap. You've escaped one cage, caring about being approved of, and entered another, caring about being seen as successful. The Stoic response: the business is just a thing you built. Success is just an outcome that happened. Neither defines you, neither requires protection. If the business fails tomorrow, you're still you. If people stop caring about your success, you're still you. Your worth isn't in the outcome. It's in the character you demonstrate regardless of outcome. Did you act with integrity? Did you treat people justly? Did you make wise decisions with available information? Did you show courage when it was difficult? That's what matters. That's what you control. The rest is externals, not worthless, but not worth attaching your identity to. Or you've built a reputation for being disciplined. You wake early, train hard, maintain strict routines. People admire this. They ask you how you do it. They want your secrets. And slowly, without noticing, you become attached to being the disciplined guy. You start making choices to maintain that image, rather than because the choices serve you. You push through injury because admitting you need rest would contradict your identity. You maintain routines that no longer fit your life because changing them would feel like admitting weakness. Success, respect, admiration, approval. You can accept these when they come without becoming dependent on them. You can lose them without being destroyed. They're like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes harsh, always temporary, never defining. So what does a life built on this foundation actually look like in practice? It looks quiet, not boring, not passive, but quiet. Because when you're not performing, not proving, not defending, there's no need for constant noise about what you're doing. You work on what matters to you without announcing it. You build without broadcasting. You improve without documenting every step for an audience. You fail without making it a public learning moment. You succeed without needing acknowledgement. This doesn't mean isolation or secrecy. It means your default state is living, not reporting on living. Doing, not talking about doing. Being, not performing being. Most men spend more energy managing the appearance of their lives than actually living them. They're so busy curating the highlight reel that they miss the actual movie. The life that needs no defense is the one you're actually living, not the one you're showing. It also looks selective, when you're no longer trying to be liked or respected by everyone. You become very careful about who you let close, not from fear or superiority, but from understanding that your time and energy are finite and precious. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be content to seem what you really are." This means accepting that most people won't understand you, and that's fine. You're not building a life for most people. You're building a life for yourself and sharing it with the small number of people who resonate with your values and choices. You don't need a large social circle. You don't need widespread recognition. You don't need to be known or admired or even understood by the masses. You need a few deep connections with people who see you clearly and choose to walk beside you. Quality over quantity in relationships. Depth over breadth in connection. Alignment over convenience in choosing company. This will mean loneliness sometimes. The path of sovereignty is often walked alone, not because you're antisocial, but because few people are willing to do the work of building their own sovereignty. Most are content to remain in the comfort of mutual performance and validation seeking. That's their choice. You can't save them from it. You can only walk your own path and see who joins you. The life that needs no defense also looks focused. When you're not distracted by others' opinions or performing for an audience, you have enormous energy available for what actually matters. You can go deep on one thing instead of being mediocre at many things. You can commit fully instead of hedging. You can take real risks instead of calculating every move for how it will look. Seneca wrote about how people scatter their attention across 1,000 trivial concerns, then complain they don't have time. But they have time. They just spend it on nonsense because they haven't clarified what actually deserves their limited days. When you're free from needing approval, you become ruthless about focus. Does this activity, relationship, or pursuit align with my values and serve my goals? If yes, full commitment. If no, immediate elimination. No halfway, no just in case, no maintaining things because you've always maintained them or because others expect you to. You'll notice that others' opinions truly become weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes harsh, always temporary, never defining. You hear them, you consider what's useful, you discard what isn't, and you continue on your path. This is freedom. Not from others, you can't control them. From the need for others to be different than they are so you can feel okay. This is sovereignty. Not over others. You have no right to that. Over yourself, your choices, your response to reality. This is the life that needs no defense, because you're not making claims about who you are. You're simply being who you are, and that needs no explanation, no justification, no performance. The Stoics spent their lives pursuing this. Not perfectly. Read Marcus Aurelius, and you'll see a man still struggling, still reminding himself of basics, still falling short. But pursuing it nevertheless, practicing daily, failing, correcting, continuing. That's what you're signing up for. Not arrival, but practice. Not perfection, but progress. Not a destination where you finally have it all figured out, but a daily choice to live according to your values regardless of external feedback. The work is never complete. You don't reach a point where you've transcended all human concerns and float above the chaos in perfect wisdom. You remain human. You remain fallible. You remain affected by life. But you build a foundation beneath yourself that holds steady when everything else shakes. You develop a core that remains unmoved when the surface is chaotic. You cultivate an inner citadel, Marcus's phrase, that no external force can breach. And from that citadel, you live, you build, you love, you work, you fail, you succeed, you experience the full range of human existence. But you do it free from the exhausting performance, free from the desperate seeking, free from the cage of others' opinions. You do it sovereign, master of your choices if not your circumstances, captain of your soul if not your fate. architect of your character, if not your outcomes. This is what the Stoics offer, not escape from difficulty, but strength within it. Not control of life, but sovereignty of self. Not freedom from others' opinions, but freedom from needing those opinions to determine your worth. Cut the performance one final time. Cut the seeking one final time. Cut the defense one final time. What remains is the work. The quiet, unglamorous daily work of living according to your values. No audience required. No validation needed. No defense necessary. Just you, your principles, and the life you're building from them. The blacksmith doesn't finish. He hammers. He shapes. He refines. Each day, he returns to the forge. Each day, he works the metal. Each day, he builds. You're no different. The forge is your life. The metal is your character. The hammer is your daily choices. Return to the forge. Work the metal. Build the blade. Not for applause. Not for recognition. Not to prove anything to anyone. Because it's your work. Because it matters. Because it's yours. That's enough. That's everything. The Stoics knew it 2,000 years ago. You know it now. The only question left: will you live it?